Welcome to English 2450, Com 2010, Intro to Film, Week 6, Cinematography, Lecture Video number 5 on Speed and Duration of the Shot and Optical Effects. So first let's kind of quickly go over what the videos so far have been dealing with, which are cinematography, the basics, looking at the differences between cinematography, visual design, and editing, what the role of the cinematographer is, the relationship between cinematography and photography, and the four main aspects of what the cinematographer does. Now, those main aspects, which I've been talking about in the videos leading up to this one, include dealing with photographic properties, things like film stock, lenses, color, tonalities, and framing, which deals with the size and shape of the frame, aspect ratios, on-screen space, off-screen space, the angle, level, height, and distance of the camera, and mobile framing. And this last video is going to be dealing with the speed and duration of the shot, optical effects, and a couple kind of miscellaneous cinematography techniques that DPs can use. So let's start off with speed and duration of the shot. Now, the first couple things listed on this slide here are kind of experimental filmmaking techniques that can be used to take something that happens very quickly and slow it down, or take something that happens very slowly and speed it up. So the first example is time-lapse photography or filmmaking, which shoots film at a very slow shooting speed and then speeds up the projection. So this would be something like taking or filming or photographing like a sunset and then showing it over the course of like 30 seconds. So something that occurs over the course of several hours is sped up in the projection process. High-speed photography is essentially the opposite of that, where you would take something that happens very quickly, you would shoot it with a high-speed camera, a lot of frames per second, and then you would slow it down when you project it so we can see this thing happening much more slowly than it naturally does. So like a popcorn kernel popping or a bullet hitting a glass vase, for example, you would take that shot with a high-speed camera and then you would slow it down so we could see that happen in detail. And rather than happening in a split second, it would take, however long, 30 seconds, a minute, etc. Another way that speed and the duration of the shot can be affected by the choices that the DP makes is through the art of the long take. Now, the long take should not be confused with a long shot in terms of shot size, the distance between the camera and the thing being filmed. So if I say long shot, I might be referring to the distance between the camera and the thing being filmed, right? The camera is far enough away where you can see an entire human body from head to toe. That's a long shot. A long take refers to specifically time or duration, that the camera is following or focusing on one specific thing for a long period of time before moving away or cutting away. Now, an easy way to remember this is to think of take as time and shot as space. So long take, T, refers to the time, the amount of time that a camera focuses on a given thing. Long shot refers to space, or the spatial distance between the camera and the thing being filmed. So an important thing to keep in mind here is that a long take starts with the director of photography, but ultimately it's up to the editor whether or not that long take makes it into the final product of the film. So an unusually long period of time where the camera focuses on one thing without cutting or moving away, often combined with camera movement. That is a long take. So a really good current example of this is from the music video for Childish Gambino's This Is America. The entire music video is composed of a couple long takes with some invisible editing or cutting in between those long takes. So the director of photography made a decision for the camera to follow, right, or dolly, along behind the character for a long period of time in this long take. However, when that footage goes to the editing phase, the editor can decide to chop it apart, to piece it back together. So the long take is partially the result of the DP taking the footage in a certain way, but also it relies on the editor kind of leaving that long take intact rather than kind of cutting it apart. So remember, a long take deeply affects the speed and the duration of the shot, but really this is a collaboration between the cinematographer and the editor to make sure that that long take stays intact in the final product. Now, this is all important because the use of cinematography to impact the speed and duration of the shot can create an interesting rhythm or pattern in how the film flows, right? The speed with which the camera moves or the duration of the takes can drastically affect the overall rhythm of the final film product. So this isn't just how long the camera might focus on any given object before moving away or cutting away, but also if the camera is moving, if we have mobile framing, is the camera moving quickly or slowly? If it's on a track and the camera is moving slowly along, following something at a very gradual and easy pace, versus the camera is on a high-speed car, hurtling down a track, like moving very, very quickly, then that's going to affect the rhythm and the pattern that the film is creating. So the director of photography, how quickly the camera moves in terms of mobile framing, how long the camera stays focused on any given thing, overall affects the rhythm of the final film product. Think about the differences in camera movement, the quickness of the camera, how long the camera stays focused on any given thing in a horror movie or an action movie. In a horror movie, you might kind of slowly follow a character as they walk through a creepy old house, right? And that kind of builds tension through that slowness. In an action film, the camera might be on a high speed, on a high speed track or dolly, quickly following a car chase, maybe shaking, maybe cutting very quickly. And that rhythm and pattern created by the shooting, the cinematography, and by the editing really affect our overall response to the film's end product. In addition to the control that the DP has over the duration of the shot and the movement of the shot, they also have control over something called optical effects or special effects. Not all special effects relate back to what the cinematographer is doing, however. Some special effects are done after the fact, like CGI or motion capture. Optical effects specifically refers to photographic tricks. These are the special effects that are accomplished by doing something specific with the camera, the position of the camera, or something with the film stock. So these are more kind of physical effects. So optical effects include rear projection and front projection, which are two different but related techniques that we'll talk about more on Wednesday in class, and I'll give some examples to show how it works. Rear and front projection are kind of difficult to explain without like a diagram showing exactly kind of how the camera is positioned and how it works. So I'll kind of leave that to Wednesday. Superimposition is a very old filmmaking technique. It goes back until at least the early 1900s, where multiple layers of images make it appear like two things that were actually filmed separately are occurring in the same space. So layering one image over top of another image through the technique of double exposure. And this has been happening for almost as long as film has existed. One of the earliest examples of superimposition is in the early Edison film Life of a Firefighter, where a character is having a dream, and in the dream sequence multiple layers of images work together to make it seem as if what's happening in the dream and what's happening in the bedroom as the character sleeps are occurring in the same space. So that's an example of superimposition. Another optical effect is the use of matte work, compositing, green screen, or blue screen to composite or paste together a photograph, a painting, or a digital painting with a film strip that contains actors or figures. So essentially, there's a photograph, a painting, or a digital painting that's created, that's kind of scaled down, and that's printed onto part of a film strip. Then it can be jigsawed together with another film strip containing the other pieces of the image. So this is also known as compositing. I do have an example here that shows matte work in more detail. That's pretty interesting. This is taken from one of the original Star Wars films. The top image here shows an artist painting the matte, where he's painting kind of the stormtroopers on the black background. The image here shows the end product of the matte painting, where you've got the ship and the stormtroopers over here. And then this is the final composite. This is where the actors, the figures here in red in the center, are on a separate film strip that's composited or layered on top of the matte painting to create one final image that looks seamless. It looks like it all kind of blends together. This is an example of an optical effect, a physical effect that's done on the film stock itself. So this would fall under kind of the realm of cinematography. Other types of special effects might not necessarily, though. So the speed and duration of the shot, optical effects, are also things that fall under the jurisdiction of the director of photography. There are a couple of kind of miscellaneous cinematography techniques, though, that are also important to talk about, but that don't necessarily fall under any of the categories that we've already discussed. So the first one is a point of view shot. Point of view shot is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's a shot that shows what a character would see through their own eyes. Now, this is used a lot in filmmaking to kind of get us to identify with a particular character. Point of view shot. Another cinematography technique that goes back at least until the early 1940s is the use of deep focus. And I talked about this a lot a couple weeks ago when we were talking about visual design, because deep focus requires that the cinematographer is doing a particular thing, but also that the space is designed in a specific way that makes it open to a kind of deep focus photography. So in deep focus, the cinematographer uses a kind of faster film style, shorter focal length lens, and really intense lighting to create a depth of field, right? And you'll remember that this is where you can visibly and clearly see a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And all of those three kind of planes within the screen create an illusion of depth. That's why it's called deep focus. This was popularized in the film Citizen Kane, and there are a couple photographic examples of this if you go back a few weeks into visual design. Another example of a cinematography technique that's used pretty commonly is called rack focus. Now, rack focus, like deep focus, uses those different layers, the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Specifically, what it does is it places an object in the foreground or the background and it blurs them, right? So you might have an object in the background that's very, very blurry while the foreground is very sharp, and then it switches. So the foreground is very blurry while the background is very sharp. I'll show an example of this in class on Wednesday to clarify, but the important thing with rack focus to remember is that it helps the audience kind of focus and hone in on a particular object by blurring the things around it, behind it, or in front of it. Another important piece of cinematography that again relates back a bit to visual design is called the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is specifically about how the images on the screen are kind of composed and framed. So if you take the frame, right, the rectangle of the screen, and you split it into 9 even segments using 2 vertical lines like this and 2 horizontal lines like this, you're going to end up with 4 intersections. And the screen will be split into thirds horizontally and thirds vertically. Objects of interest, the thing that you want your audience members to focus on and look at, should be grouped around those intersecting lines because that is where our eyes naturally focus. So that's the rule of thirds. When you take the frame, you split it using horizontal and vertical lines into 9 even rectangles, and then you use those lines to determine where you're going to place your important characters, your important props on the screen. So this is a basic kind of technique of photography and cinematography. So that kind of covers us for cinematography for this week. Thank you for making it this far in the lectures. This week's secret code for extra credit on the upcoming quiz is Citizen Kane. Secret code for extra credit on the upcoming quiz is Citizen Kane, CITIZEN KANE, Citizen Kane. So please keep that in mind for when you take your quiz. Of course, if you have any questions, please do send me an email or ask me in class on Wednesday. We'll take a look at a couple clips, images, and examples to help clarify some of the information about cinematography, and I look forward to seeing you then.